Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something pretty incredible, a new AI called BrainIAC. It was developed by a team from Mass General Brigham and Harvard, and it's doing something that, until now, felt like pure science fiction. It's learning to read and understand complex brain scans, sometimes with almost no human help at all. So let's get into it.
Just start by imagining this scenario for a second. A patient has a very rare type of brain tumor. There are maybe only a handful of documented cases in the world. What if an AI could analyze their brain scan, just that one scan, and not only help with the diagnosis, but also predict how the disease might progress?
Yeah, for years, that kind of thing has been pure science fiction. And here's why. AI, especially in medicine, has this massive appetite for data. To learn any task, like spotting a tumor, it usually needs to see thousands of examples that have been painstakingly labeled by human experts. No data, no model. It's been a hard and fast rule.
But what if you could change the rules? Well, that's exactly what BrainIAC is doing. BrainIAC stands for Brain Imaging Adaptive Core, and it's a totally different kind of AI called a foundation model. And trust me, it is a complete game changer.
Okay, so to really get why BrainIAC is such a big deal, we first have to understand the problem it was designed to solve. And it's a huge one. You could even call it the Achilles heel of medical AI.
So on the one hand, everyone sees the amazing potential of AI in medicine, right? It could completely transform how we diagnose and treat brain diseases. But on the other hand, there's this harsh reality. Getting the labeled data to train these AIs is just incredibly hard. It's expensive, it takes forever for doctors to do, and for those rare diseases we talked about, the data might not even exist. This gap has been a massive roadblock for the whole field.
So how do you get around a problem that seems impossible? Well, the team behind BrainIAC realized you don't just build a slightly better version of the same old thing, you have to build an entirely new, smarter foundation from the ground up. Let's dig into what makes this so different. BrainIAC is what's called a foundation model. The best way to think about it is like this. A typical AI model is like memorizing a few key phrases in a foreign language to order coffee on a trip. It works for that one specific task, and that's it. A foundation model, on the other hand, is like actually learning the entire language, the grammar, the vocabulary, everything. Once you know the language, you can adapt to any conversation. BrainIAC learns the language of brain MRIs first, before it's asked to do any specific job. And just look at the scale of this project. The research, published in Nature Neuroscience, wasn't just some small test. The team trained BrainIAC on a massive dataset of almost 50,000 brain MRIs from 34 different sources. This was a colossal effort to build something that's genuinely robust and generalizable. So this is the really cool part. How does an AI learn the language of the brain without any experts telling it, hey, this is a tumor, or this is healthy tissue? Well, the answer lies in its secret sauce, a technique called self-supervised learning. It sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty elegant. The system takes a tiny 3D chunk of a brain scan. Then it creates two slightly altered versions of that same chunk. Maybe one is rotated a bit, the other has a different contrast. The AI's only job is to figure out that these two different views actually came from the same original piece. By doing this millions and millions of times, it starts to understand the fundamental patterns and structures of the brain all by itself. All right, so after all that self-learning, it was time to see what BrainIAC could actually do. It was time for the final exam. And believe me, this was no simple pop quiz. It was a grueling, 7-part gauntlet of tests designed to push this model to its absolute limits. And just look at the range of these tests. They went from something relatively easy, like identifying the type of MRI scan, all the way to things that are incredibly complex. We're talking about predicting how long a patient might survive, or even identifying a specific genetic mutation just from looking at the pixels in the image. Things that are sometimes flat out impossible for even a human expert to do. And this right here is where the story gets really, really good. After all that training and facing this brutal 7-part exam, how did BrainIAC do? Well, the results are what make this a true breakthrough. You know, the researchers themselves put it perfectly in the paper. They said BrainIAC's real power, its true utility, shows up most in those exact situations that have always been AI's biggest weakness, when the problems are hard and you have very little data to work with. So let's look at the proof. Here's a chart for tumor segmentation, basically outlining a tumor, when all the models get 100% of the training data. BrainIAC is the clear winner, no question. But, the other models aren't completely left in the dust. You might look at this and think, okay, it's better, but Is it a revolution?
But now, watch what happens when we pull the rug out from under them. We take away 90% of the labeled data, leaving them with just scraps. The other models, they fall apart. The one built from scratch is basically useless. But BrainIAC, it barely flinches. Its performance hardly drops. That deep foundational knowledge it built on its own allows it to excel where others fail completely.
And that brings us to the single most mind-blowing result of the whole study. For some of these incredibly hard tasks, BrainIAC was able to achieve useful, sometimes remarkable performance after being shown just one single labeled example. Remember that question from the beginning? Can an AI diagnose a tumor from a single scan? Well, this is about as close to yes as we've ever been.
So what does this all add up to in the real world? This isn't just a cool academic exercise. We're really talking about a fundamental shift, moving this kind of power out of the research lab and putting it into the hands of doctors in the clinic.
The downstream effects here could be huge. This could dramatically speed up research for those rare diseases where data is almost impossible to find. It could help us discover new biomarkers in scans, patterns that tell us about a disease that we never even knew to look for. And think about smaller hospitals that don't have massive data sets. This could let them build powerful AI tools too. It basically opens the door to tackling problems we used to think were just too hard.
Look, BrainIAC is a massive step forward for neuroscience, no doubt. But it's also a preview of a much bigger shift happening across all of AI. And it leaves us with a really important question to think about. As these powerful general-purpose foundation models become more and more common, how are they going to reshape not just radiology, but the entire landscape of medicine as we know it?